I'm Maria Elena Giassi, and this is Currents. Illinois Catholic Charities are forced to end adoption and foster care. We'll hear what the church there has to say. Plus, do we need more or less government?
Where I stand on big versus small government divide, I would be more on the small government.
The GOP candidates have their own ideas.
I'm going to fight to overhaul Washington, build a smaller, more humble federal government.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Matt McClure has the night off. A dispute over Illinois' civil union bill ended this week when bishops in 3 of the state's dioceses announced they were dropping a lawsuit against the state. The dioceses wanted an exemption from a law that would have required their social service agencies to grant adoptions and foster care services to unmarried couples. The Illinois Religious Freedom Protections and Civil Unions Act, which was signed into law earlier this year, gives couples in civil unions many of the same rights as married couples. The dioceses of Springfield, Belleville, and Joliet have chosen to shut down their adoption and foster care programs that violate their religious beliefs by granting those services to unmarried couples. In a statement, the bishops of the dioceses say the decision to shut down was necessary because the state of Illinois has made it financially impossible to continue providing these services. Earlier today, our news director, Ed Wilkinson, talked about this with Robert Gilligan, the executive director of the Illinois Catholic Conference.
Well, Robert Gilligan, executive director of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you.
Robert, the state of Illinois passed a same-sex marriage bill, and it says that Catholic social service agencies, foster care, adoptive services must provide their services to same-sex couples. The bishops don't like that policy, and they sued the state, and now they've decided not to pursue this through the courts. What's behind the bishop's decision here?
Well, the bill that passed in Illinois was regarding civil unions and not same-sex marriage, but for all intents and purposes, they're pretty much the same. They afford the same benefits as a marriage and a civil union. And in essence, what happened was we went to the state legislature, we pled our case in front of the governor's office, and didn't get any relief in either of those two forums. And so we went to the courts, and we asked them to determine whether we were in compliance with the law that passed. We feel we are. To this day, we still feel we're in compliance with the Illinois Religious Freedom Protection and Civil Unions Act. So we kept asking the court, well, where's the religious freedom? And in essence, what happened is the court decided there wasn't a property right. There is no, the state doesn't have to contract with Catholic charities. So what the court said to us is, well, because they don't have to contract with you, we don't have to decide these other questions. And in essence, what happened is, as I'm sure your listeners and viewers will understand, litigation is expensive, it's costly. I think what happened is we were just up against a force that was just too strong. And so that decision was made that we just can't continue any longer on this fight.
And in effect, each diocese is independent, and this is being played out in different ways in each of the dioceses in Illinois. I know down in Belleville, there seems to be a split. Catholic Social Services of Southern Illinois has said they will no longer be part of the diocese. What's happening down there?
It's confusing. There are 6 different dioceses in Illinois. Most of the dioceses, what they did is they transitioned their existing caseloads to other secular agencies that would be willing to process the application of a same-sex couple. Belleville did something slightly different. In essence, what's going to happen, in my understanding of Belleville, is that the same employees, the same director, will still be operating under a newly formed organization called Christian Social Services. And it's my understanding that the newly formed organization that will begin in January will process the applications of same-sex couples, but they will have no relationship to the diocese. They will not receive any funding, and they will not be part of the diocese in any way, shape, or form. There'll be a separate organization that's going to be spun off, and my understanding is that almost all those employees will continue to operate just working for a different organization.
Right. Well, is this a matter of the state splitting the church, kind of a divide and conquer?
I think it is. It is. You see 6 dioceses all trying to react to this situation in the best way that they thought would allow them to honor the Church's teachings and try to continue in providing quality child welfare services. Mm-hmm. And I think what you've seen in Illinois is a situation where it's been very difficult to react to these situations. Mm-hmm. And I think the state has split up the Church a little bit in regard to our ability to act in a unified way. Mm-hmm. I hope that this does not happen in other locations throughout the country. And I think it's caused a concern for everybody out there who's facing legislation on same-sex marriage or civil unions. Mm-hmm. There is an emerging conflict between religious liberty and same-sex marriage, and I think in Illinois we've taken the brunt of that.
Well, Bishop Pabrocki in Springfield said that this will allow his Catholic charities to work in a more Catholic way and using less funding from the state. Is that possible to conduct a social service program like that with less funds and be more Catholic? What does he mean by more Catholic?
I think what he means by that is increasingly we are seeing strings attached with public money. When you take public money for any purpose, there are certain requirements that go along with it, and mm-hmm. there are some of those requests just the Church cannot honor. Mm-hmm. This example is acknowledging placing a child in a same-sex couple with a same-sex couple. Right. So, the answer is no. We can't do it to the degree that we have. It will be smaller. There will be less, foster care and adoption going on. There'll be no foster care. They will still continue with private adoptions. Mm-hmm. But I think the lesson for us here is, and we'll see how we do, there's plenty of needs in society, and the Church has always tried to address those as best it can, and that's what we're going to continue to do. I think what we're going to be calling on is lay Catholics to donate more, to roll up our sleeves, and let's really work together to meet the needs of the poor and vulnerable.
Do you see this spreading to other states, this problem, this difference between the state and the Church? I mean, here in New York State, we have same-sex marriage now. Is that likely to become a problem here in New York with foster care and adoptive services?
It could. I don't know the details of the New York situation. I know you passed a bill on same-sex marriage, but look, I think most of the people out there know in Washington, D.C., they were no longer able to continue in some social services. I know the Boston diocese had to eliminate some of its contracts with the state. San Francisco had to as well. And now the entire state of Illinois is out of state-funded foster care. I think there is a trend. I mean, there's a pattern here that I think is emerging into a trend.
Right. Well, it's a trend that certainly we'll be watching and we should be concerned about. Robert Gilligan, Executive Director of the Illinois Catholic Conference of Illinois, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
There's more currents ahead. Bishops unveil an effort to tackle healthcare issues. We'll have that and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Coming up later, some are saying he's the new GOP frontrunner. We'll hear from the candidate who many left for dead. First, let's have a look at the day's headlines. U.S. bishops meeting in Baltimore have voted to create a new subcommittee to tackle healthcare issues. The new committee comes on the recommendation of a bishops' task force on healthcare. The bishops have advocated for adequate and affordable healthcare for all, but spoke out against last year's healthcare reform, which they say does not adequately protect against taxpayer funding of abortion. And the bishops are calling on the Senate to remove provisions from an appropriations bill that they say pose a direct threat to human life. In a letter to senators, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, head of the bishops' pro-life activities, says the provisions of the bill would lift a ban on federal funding of health plans that cover elective abortions. Daniel DiNardo says the bill would also allow funding for elective abortions in Washington, D.C., and a program that supports coerced abortion in China, and permanently ban the Mexico City policy, which prohibits funding for overseas abortion. The bishops are urging the Senate to amend the bill to correct those provisions. And Texas bishops are urging a congressman from their home state to not make disproportionate cuts to anti-poverty programming. In a letter, the bishops urged Congressman Jeb Hensarling and other members of a congressional supercommittee to reduce spending in a way that involves shared sacrifice and responsibility from all. The bishops say programs that help the most vulnerable and needy with affordable housing and basic necessities should not be disproportionately cut. At yesterday's bishops' meeting in Baltimore, Washington Cardinal Donald Wuerl announced the details of a new ordinariate for Anglicans converting to Catholicism. The new ordinariate would be created on January 1st of next year. Rome Reports has more.
As of now, 2 Anglican dioceses with roughly 2,000 people have expressed their desire to join. Cardinal William Joseph Leveda, who serves as the president of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, also deals with personal ordinariates. He says so far 67 Anglican priests have submitted their requests to become ordained by the Catholic Church. 37 of them have already been initially approved. Anglican priests who are married will be ordained as Catholic priests, but they won't be able to become bishops. A document and catechesis to prepare Anglican priests and lay people who wish to become part of the Church have also been approved. A personal ordinariate, depending on its location, is linked to a respective episcopal conference. Each one of them will be governed by a so-called ordinary, who in this case will be a bishop or priest. The leader will in turn be advised by a council.
Meanwhile, 2 bishops who just returned from Iraq say American Catholics and the U.S. as a whole can help after U.S. troops leave. Tucson Bishop Gerald Kakanis says the withdrawal of combat troops does not reduce the obligation to help. Youngstown Bishop George Murray, meanwhile, says he envisions a modern-day version of the Marshall Plan to help Iraq. Turning now to Pakistan, where 2 Protestant leaders were forced to flee from that country after being accused of blasphemy. The Vatican news agency Fides reports the 2 men were threatened with the death penalty after being falsely accused of using contemptuous words against the Prophet Muhammad. A legal aid organization has helped the pair flee the country and provide a safe haven for their families. Back in this country, Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput says religious freedom should be an election year issue. Speaking with the National Catholic Register, Archbishop Chaput says that our Catholic identity is under threat. Chaput says the doctrine of the separation of church and state was established to protect the church from the state, but is being employed for the opposite purpose. He says Catholics need to be educated on the dangers to religious freedom. When it comes to improving the global financial crisis, some experts say it's all about the family. Rome Reports has details.
Solutions to the world's economic worries are being presented in all shapes and sizes, but one area which is often overlooked and plays a critical role in development is the family. An economic forum was held in Rome to examine the role of the family on the economy. Brad Wilcox is the director of the National Marriage Project. He says that societies and economies will flourish if children are raised in a healthy family setting.
Sure, we know that kids are more likely to get the human and the social capital that they need to flourish, both in life and the market, when they're raised by intact married parents.
Groups like the National Marriage Project study different ways in which governments associate with the family. Some countries have public policies that specifically promote family life. Finland, for instance, offers a child credit that families can spend in ways they see best fit to raise their children. This often means one parent is able to take more time to spend at home with the children. Policies like those in Finland is something the National Marriage Project is trying to promote everywhere.
What we've talked about today really is that the family plays a crucial role in providing and cultivating the future consumers, workers, and taxpayers of the modern world, and that the family is often neglected in our consideration of the economy and of the welfare of business.
The studies presented at this meeting on the family suggest it's in a country's long-term interest to promote the family unit. The group is not only suggesting public policy, they also promote steps that can be taken by private businesses, such as maternity leave and benefits associated with raising a family.
There has been a historic change for a Catholic media company. After more than 118 years, St. Anthony Messenger Press has changed its name. The company is now known as Franciscan Media. It says the new name better reflects the roots of its mission. The company operates 2 book imprints, a website, a syndicated radio program, and the magazine, St. Anthony Messenger. And Catholics in the U.S. will now be able to celebrate the memorial of Blessed John Paul II. The bishops voted to add an optional October 22nd memorial for John Paul to the U.S. calendar. October 22nd is the anniversary of John Paul's inauguration as Pope. He was beatified on May 1st of this year in Rome. One more miracle is needed for John Paul to be declared a saint. The bishops also approved an optional memorial for Blessed Mary Ann Cope, a nun who helped care for leprosy patients in Hawaii. Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, when it comes to government, is it a case of too much or not enough?
The question of whether or not government should be big or small is important for anyone who is conversant with the major political conversations going on.
Welcome back. Catholic bishops have not been shy about weighing in on matters involving healthcare, deficit reduction, and other issues currently being hammered out in Washington. But what does the Church have to say when it comes to the size of government? Earlier this week, the Church of St. Vincent Ferrer, Manhattan, hosted a talk on this topic in its annual St. Albert's Day lecture. But as we found out, when it comes to big or small government, there is no simple answer.
Our political system has changed so that you've got two parties that are uniformly locked into ideology. That's something that didn't exist, say, the 1950s till about the 1970s, where you had liberal and conservative wings in each of the parties, and they had more of a chance at negotiation. Now you have these two hostile bodies, and when you have to put them together, they have a lot of trouble coming up with answers.
Tonight, Father Albino Barrera, a professor of economics and theology at Providence College, spoke on economics and government policy.
Well, whether it is faith or reason, we find that there is need for balance in terms of respecting the importance of letting individuals do what they should be doing for themselves, while at the same time also being respectful of our obligations and being sensitive to our obligations to step in and provide assistance whenever people are no longer able to provide for themselves, or whenever people do not have the means to be able to do the things that they should be doing for themselves.
The individual good and the common good, while distinct from each other, are inseparable. In that individual good and common good need each other. They're necessary conditions to each other. The individual can only achieve his or her good in the context of the common good, just as the common good cannot be achieved without taking care of the individual members within its ranks.
What is the common good? A lot of people, they say it and everybody throws it out there, but they have different ideas on what the common good is. It's like you're talking ideology at the end of the day. People can pretend, well, no, it's not. It's very objective, but I don't know if it is.
I think if we focus on the common good, I think it's easier to recognize the need in the other person rather than simply emphasize, one's own rights.
I think we need to apply that within ourselves. We can't rely on the government to subsidize our charity. And I think there's a big problem in the United States right now, is that people are like, oh, the government will do it. I don't need to give my time, treasure, and talent. So I think it has to be going back to rediscovering ourselves, our neighbors, our families, to bring back the issue of social justice. I don't think it can be subsidized by the government, because the government will always do things for a political return.
We want justice to bloom and flower into its fullness, which is charity. Charity is union with God. Charity is being able to see others as ourselves, to be able to identify ourselves with others because we see in them a fellow child of God. That is what I hope people will be able to take away with them. In the end, charity will always be able to find a way out of our problems.
Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. When we return, is he the new GOP frontrunner?
I am the only candidate running who has actually led at the national level.
Finally tonight, when it comes to big government versus small government, at least one Republican presidential candidate has made it clear where he stands.
Every American who's been knocked down by Washington's mismanagement, here's my pledge. I'm going to fight to end the IRS as you know it today. I'm going to fight to overhaul Washington, build a smaller, more humble federal government.
That's Texas Governor Rick Perry campaigning in Iowa earlier this week. In a recent debate, Perry famously said he would eliminate 3 federal agencies, but then had trouble remembering one of the 3 he would do away with. Meanwhile, another candidate who should be very familiar with the ins and outs of the federal government is House Speaker Newt Gingrich, one of 2 Catholics campaigning for the GOP presidential nod. As recently as a few months ago, Gingrich was considered a long shot, but is now emerging as a viable candidate. CNN's Jim Acosta caught up with him.
Meet the GOP's latest fresh face, Newt Gingrich.
Yesterday afternoon in Jefferson, Iowa, someone introduced me as the front runner.
Yes, the same Gingrich who was a dead candidate walking last summer now has a shot at the GOP nomination. Drawing big crowds in Iowa, the former Speaker of the House is candid about his near-death political experience.
Did you feel dead?
No, I felt desperate, but I didn't feel dead. I've done this for 53 years, and the 2 hardest months of my career were June and July. I am the only candidate running who has actually led at the national level.
But with Gingrich, humility has its limits. In assessing what initially went wrong with his campaign, he compared himself to 2 conservative giants.
And where did you go wrong?
Oh, I think that it was a big mistake on my part to try to bring in conventional consultants, because I am, much like Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, I am such an unconventional political figure that you really need to design a very unique campaign that fits the way I operate and what I'm trying to do.
Gingrich has climbed in the polls by outshining many of his rivals at the GOP debates and by selling ideas that sometimes veer from Tea Party doctrine. For example, Gingrich would spend billions on a new federal brain science project to find cures for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
The best way to control the cost of Medicare is to defeat the diseases so people stay healthy.
But in nearly the same breath, Gingrich rails against the Washington establishment.
The Washington establishment model is pain and austerity.
Despite being a creature of the Capitol for nearly 3 decades.
You're not a creature of Washington.
No.
How long have you lived outside of Washington since your days as Speaker?
I haven't. Well, I mean, I've lived in McLean, Virginia for a practical reason. I did work at the Central Intelligence Agency. I did work at the Pentagon.
But critics might say you are a creature of Washington if you've spent all of these years.
You can call me anything you want to. All right? None of my policy proposals represent the Washington establishment.
There are other contradictions. One day he jabs Mitt Romney as just a manager. The next, he refuses to criticize him.
Look, Mitt is a good guy.
Authentic conservative.
I'm not going to get into, it depends on what you mean by authentic, but I'm not going to judge Mitt Romney. The voters will judge Mitt Romney.
Ultimately, Gingrich wants voters to judge him not on his past, but on what his campaign website calls the new Newt.
Is it because this is the new Newt that we're seeing here, the new Gingrich?
Go back and get the Time magazine cover in 1994, where they had me as Scrooge, holding Tiny Tim's broken crutch. And the title was, How Mean Will Gingrich's America Be to the Poor? I mean, one of the things elite media did was it created a caricature of me, so that when people finally saw me in debates, they said, that can't be Newt Gingrich. Because, in fact, I'm very different from the media imagery.
That is all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, we head out to the Flatlands section of Brooklyn for a visit to our latest School of the Week. Until then, be sure to join us online at currentsny.net. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Maria Elena Giassi. Thank you for watching and have a great night.